So I think for me, the worst thing is when someone asks me, how can I add value to? It's like, you're giving me another job, right? You're giving me
Right.
something. So flip that on its head. And if you truly want to add value to someone, then add value to them, right? Figure it out. Figure out what it is that they may need or may, be interested in, and go out of your and stand out. Do something to make yourself stand out to them. And don't start by asking. Start by doing. Start by giving.
Welcome back to Curiosity Class, the podcast where we break down complex topics into easy to understand ideas and bite-sized pieces. My name is Jeff Album, and I've been a curious person my entire life. Inspired by Albert Einstein's quote, "If you can't explain something simply, you don't understand it well enough," we aim to make learning accessible and engaging. On this show, we're going to bring you experts from various fields, ranging from personal finance to physics, to help you understand everything from 401ks to how airplanes fly. So let's dive in and satisfy our curiosity together. Welcome back to another episode of Curiosity Class. I am super honored and privileged and humbled to have the great Yonah Weiss here on the podcast. He is many things. He's a friend, a mentor, the cost seg king, a real estate investor, host of the Weiss Advice podcast. And I think I missed like 17 things that you do. So thank you so much for being here, Yonah. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I think father, husband are probably the most important ones that get overlooked oftentimes when we're dealing with business and stuff. But certainly I would put those on the top of the list.
That makes it even better. It makes you a better friend, mentor, all of the other things because you put those at the top. So I'm even more excited now. So Yonah, I think, the show is called Curiosity Class. The idea is to explain things very simply. So to explain typically complex items in a simple, easy to understand manner. We could talk about 1,000 things today because I think you are an expert in many different realms. What I wanted to focus on today is cost segregation specifically. So for those that don't know, I kind of want to hear a little bit of your background and your story, get into how you got into this very niche topic that is called this thing, and then dive in and give listeners an understanding of what that is.
Sure. So my background was actually in teaching. I was a teacher for about 15 years in various forms, but that really has always been my art form, I guess, for since I was a kid, as a tutor, as a young kid, and all kinds of things. But real estate came about 10 years ago. I was looking for kind of some additional income, some way, had big student loan debt and had kind of a really scary health crisis in my immediate family, and realized that I was getting in more debt, and it was just like crazy. I needed to find something else to do. It was kind of like something that shook me up. I realized that I needed to make some changes. Now, obviously, money is a big factor when you're deep in debt and don't really see a way out. I kept, asking friends. I wasn't really interested in going back to school or doing anything like that to find a new profession, but I was very open to opportunities and open to doing anything. So I just put the word out to friends and acquaintances of mine, hey, I'm looking for something. And real estate kept coming up in conversation. And so I just kind of tried it out. I started as a mortgage broker, kind of by chance, because I met a friend of mine who was dealing in commercial mortgages for a while. And he's like, hey, why don't you come work with me? I'll teach you everything you need to know about commercial real estate. I was like, okay, why not? I don't know anything. So, there's everything to learn. And that was fun. I got my realtor's license as well and did some, renting and selling some homes, things like that. And then, wanted to do some fix and flips, tried that out for a little while until about 7 years ago, I was introduced to this company, Madison Commercial Real Estate, Madison Specs, which is the biggest national cost segregation company. And I had no idea what that was, right? And probably some of our listeners are like, what is cost segregation? Well, I hope we've piqued your curiosity because we're going to answer that question soon. But to me, I was like, what is this? And to my amazement, I put it out there to, friends and, the people in the past 3 years that I had worked with in the real estate space. And I was like, hey, you guys know what this cost seg thing is? And 99% of the people had no idea what it was. It wasn't like, oh yeah, sort of, kind of. No, it was like, what is that? Like, never heard of it. And my teacher's cap, kind of went back on and had a spark, kind of a moment of clarity. It was like, wait a second, this is such a powerful tax strategy, a tool, and yet no one knows about it. Why is that? And I found that the simple answer was they just didn't know what it was. It's simple education. And the way that I came to that realization was actually I was sitting with a mentor of mine, a guy who had been in the space, real estate space, for 30 years. He started as a broker, but then got into development, and he was doing huge, industrial logistics centers, like million square foot logistics centers for Amazon and Pepsi. He's a very, very successful developer and owner of operator. I mean, he owns like a couple $100 million in real estate. And I was sitting with him. I was like, hey, you heard this thing, cost seg. I was offered this job, Madison Specs. He's like, oh yeah, we use Madison for all our cost segs. And I was like, wait a second. Okay, that's a good sign, right? My mentor, like, it's a good sign. Not only does he know what it is, he uses this company. I was like, well, I asked him, I said, I asked a bunch of other people and no one had any idea what it was. And he's like, are you kidding me? He's like, it's a no brainer. Those were his words. And I remember that. He's like, it's a no brainer. And I was like, wait a second, this is a really successful guy. For him, it's a no brainer. How come no one else knows about that? And so that was kind of my introduction into causing into this industry. And, since then kind of learned the ropes and become the world's expert on the subject. So it's been an interesting ride.
And it all started from that teaching cap that you put on.
It's all starts from curiosity. That's really what teaching is, because teaching, a real teacher is a student, because you want to learn, and the more you teach something, the better you understand it. And really,
Sure.
so it's all about learning, and you learn more from your students than you do from your teaching.
Sure. And so while you were working kind of on that journey, getting before you got to Madison Specs, were you still teaching at the time, or were you doing mortgage brokering full time? What was that like?
Yeah, I took a break from the teaching. I just realized I needed to immerse myself and just completely make a change if I was going to be successful, if I was going to make it work. And it was a risk, because obviously I didn't have any income at that point,
Yeah.
and going into a commission based position, that's it's a huge risk. And I remember actually uh, I was doing the mortgage broker for a little while, and then I wanted to learn about real estate brokering as well. And I met a guy, a crazy story, by the way. I had read the book, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, and I was really blown away by this. And literally the next day, I was like reading the chapter on synergy, which is the sixth step. And the next day I see an ad for synergy real estate. And I was like, oh, wow, that's so cool. Like, here's this book I'm reading, and it's talking all about synergy. And I'm like interested in, real estate. And then this synergy real estate company, like brokerage, comes up. And I was just like, wow, that's not a coincidence. And I truly believe, like, everything happens in our lives. There's a reason for it. It's not necessarily a coincidence. And so I just called the guy up. I was like, hey, and I, got to the owner. It was a small little real estate brokerage. And I got to the owner, young guy. He was like 24, 25. And we started talking. And I'm like, I'm interested in maybe becoming a broker. Maybe I can, work for you. And he's like, come and meet me. And I sat down with him in his office, and he said, this is totally commission based. So you shouldn't really start this job unless you have, another salary. Right. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't have anything right now. Right. And I told him, I was like, yeah, no, it's fine. Don't worry about it. Like, I'm really interested in learning. But I remember that, he was absolutely right, because it's really, really hard, because you need to put in a good, sometimes 3, 6, 9 months in order, of hard work until you actually see some results. Obviously
Right.
anyone can get lucky, but it's not sustainable. And that I didn't realize at the time, but it's so true. It's very hard.
Man, that's crazy. That's crazy. You mentioned that you're speaking with a mentor. It sounds like mentorship has been a large part of your journey and your career and your life. How did you find that specific mentor, and how do you think about finding mentors in, day to day?
Well, I think the opportunities are out there in front of you, and obviously your network is your net worth. I say that very often, and I truly believe it. This particular mentor was introduced through a common friend before I even knew anything about real estate. Before this incident had happened, and I was starting to get into real estate. But then once I did, meaning so we were acquaintances, and I knew who he was. We had several conversations, spent some time together, and so then when it came that I was starting to get into real estate, I reached out to him and I said, "Hey, listen, can I spend some time with you? Can you teach me, some things or two, or maybe just offer, some time that I can ask you questions and things like that." And so it wasn't like a formal mentorship type thing, but it was more like a friend, and someone who I looked up to in terms of someone who's very successful in the real estate space. And I had really an open door too. And I was,
Hmm.
very grateful for that. So yeah, obviously it's very difficult to kind of replicate that, I would say. But I definitely think there are people out there who you may know, and you have not necessarily any idea that there's, that your paths would necessarily cross in the business world. But when they do, I think you should reach out to them and see a lot of people are willing to help. Now there are plenty of people out there who are paid coaches and things like that, and I'm for that. I find they can be extremely beneficial to help one's growth. But there are even people out there who are just willing to share their knowledge.
So you said you're for that. Tend to do you spend money on coaching and improvement in that space?
I have. I find it to be very, very beneficial. I'm not someone who is like constantly, needing a coach and doing that. I find I tend to learn because of, I think just my personality and my teacher kind of hat that I wear a lot. I just pick up a lot really quickly. And
Mm.
whatever, for whatever reason, I don't find that I necessarily need a coach all the time. But yeah, I've definitely used them. I've definitely paid for coaches in the past.
Gotcha. And I just want to harp on this mentorship component just for a little bit longer. I think a lot of times, especially in the real estate space, you hear people say, "Oh, you got to get a mentor and try to add value," right? That's what everyone says. Add
Mm-hmm.
value, add value. Pragmatically speaking, because you don't want to go up to someone who's more successful than you and be like, "Hey, I want to add value to you." That's like the worst thing you can say. So, from your perspective, as someone who's probably been mentored and been on the other end, you've mentored people a lot.
Yes.
Um, can you give us a pragmatic, like, hey, the successful person, you want to reach out to them? What can you say that's helpful and talking about synergy can be a synergistic relationship where you can actually add value to someone who is ahead of where you're at?
Right. So I think for me, the worst thing is when someone asks me, how can I add value to? It's like, you're giving me another job, right? You're giving me
Right.
something. So flip that on its head. And if you truly want to add value to someone, then add value to them, right? Figure it out. Figure out what it is that they may need or may, be interested in, and go out of your and stand out. Do something to make yourself stand out to them. And don't start by asking, start by doing, start by giving. And that
Mm.
kind of perspective will put you in the right direction. And obviously there are people out there that are very busy. And again, the worst thing for me is when I get like a message from someone like, "Hey, I'd love to add value to you, let me know." Like I literally, I just ignore it, or I'll turn it back around. Really, like, it's very often for me, people will ask me, "I'd love to help you. How can I add value?" And for me, to be honest, what adds value to me is by giving and to helping people. So I'll turn it back around, like, tell me how I can help you. And by me helping you, that's going to actually add value to you, but also help me. So for me, that's like a weird kind of way to do things. That's how I like to do
Mm.
it. But in a perspective of trying to find a mentor and trying to really contact someone who may be, very hard to reach, or maybe someone that you would like to have a relationship with, but don't necessarily, use that tactic of just doing for them, right? Stand out in some way and get noticed. And, only when you add value, like I learned this from Gary Vaynerchuk many, many years ago, very, highly successful marketing genius, really. And he said, like, add value like 100 times, right? That's the name of his book, like jab, 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 right hook. It's all about just adding value, then make the sale, then make the pitch once you've already like established that value, established that common ground.
Mm. Man, I love that. I love that.
Yeah,
I
he actually
think
wanted to call the book jab, 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 jab. Right hook, and they're like 20 times, but the editors, did not let him.
they nixed that.
They cut it down to 3 jabs.
The world will never know. Okay, cool. Well, thank you for that. That's very good advice. Okay, so transitioning a little bit to kind of the title of the show is cost segregation, cost seg, right? So what the heck does that mean?
It's really the only form of segregation that is permitted in my understanding. What it is, it's a weird name for a tax strategy. Okay, so income tax. When you buy a property, besides for your primary residence, any type of business or investment property, you're able to take a tax deduction called depreciation. Okay, cost segregation is just an advanced form of depreciation. So essentially, it allows you to take bigger deductions during the earlier years of ownership. Okay, so think
Okay,
about the word cost. That's the cost of our property, right? We buy property for $1,000,000. That's our cost. Now we're going to segregate that cost into different categories, different buckets, and say the structure is going to depreciate on a 27.5 year schedule. And that typically, if you didn't do a cost seg or cost segregation, that's the whole property would be on that 27.5 year lifespan. And again, depreciation is a borrowed term. It doesn't actually mean your property is going down in value. It's just the name of this deduction. And they gave it
got it.
based on the principle that things go down in value. They said, okay, now you can take this deduction and be able to literally write off the value of your property over this long period of time. Segregating that cost is saying, well, there are certain things like furniture or fixtures, appliances, right? Shelving, countertops, cabinets, flooring, all this kind of good stuff inside your property that actually is non-structural and depreciates on a 5 year schedule, not on a 27 and a half. So if I can identify through an engineering process what those components, what those things are that depreciate faster, I can then take a huge tax write-off over that 5 year period, as opposed to you're taking a little bit every single year for 27 years.
Got it. Got it. Got it. Okay, so just to confirm, so depreciation with a D is not the opposite of appreciation in this case, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. In
So
fact,
when we
that's it was a crazy story that Bigger Pockets. Sorry to interrupt you, Jeff, but this is a fun story. Bigger Pockets, if anyone knows what that is, a great kind of real estate networking and educational forum. Well, they started a glossary on their website several years ago, maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, and just defining the terms. You look in the forums, and people use acronyms, and people use all kinds of terms. You know what it is. So they featured this glossary that now, when every time you use a word, that word gets like highlighted or underscored, and therefore you can kind of hover over it and go to the glossary and see what that word means. Well, when they started that, obviously I went and checked out the glossary, see what kind of tax terms they put in there, do my just double check, make sure they're right. Well, lo and behold, you know what it said under depreciation?
the
The
opposite of
opposite
appreciation.
of appreciation. That's exactly right. And I was like, oh no, this can't be right. Who did this? So I messaged Mindy Jensen, who like runs, the website,
Right.
and gave her the screenshot. And she was like, put like the face palm emoji, back, like, oh no, what do we do? And and they fixed it, obviously. But again, it does not mean the opposite of appreciation. It's a borrowed term, just means this tax deduction.
Got it. Okay. And so just to confirm, yeah, so appreciation, you think of something goes up in value. So you buy a house for $100,000, it appreciates, and the next year is worth $105,000, right? So in that same case, depreciation would be okay, your house is $100,000. We're going to depreciate that over 27 and a half years, right? So you take $100,000 divided by 27 and a half, and whatever that number is, that's how much you can deduct on your taxes every year. Is that right?
That's exactly right.
Okay. And so cost segregation is saying, okay, well, instead of taking 100,000 divided by 27 and a half, let's take 100,000 and divide by 5, which results in you can deduct a greater amount of tax per year over 5 years instead of over 27 and a half. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yeah, you're gonna take a portion of that property, and oftentimes for multifamily, for example, it's going to be around 20 to 30% of the value of the property is going to be in those 5 year components.
Gotcha. And so why, you know, why does this exist? Who is this benefiting?
Well, it's benefiting. I mean, ultimately, it's benefiting the owners of the real estate because it's lowering their tax liability and allowing them to have more money to reinvest by not having it taxes to pay. That usually real estate investors is going to reinvest that money.
Sure.
Well, ultimately, that benefits the economy because the commercial real estate industry, for example, is a huge industry that touches multiple aspects of the economy. So it's not just we're talking about, oh, this is just helping the rich get richer. Well, in a way, it is for sure, but the only reason why the government has created tax incentives like cost segregation or depreciation, et cetera, other types of tax deductions, it's a playbook. It's been put in there to encourage people to do certain activities which benefit the economy ultimately.
Gotcha. Do you want to dive in just, that's very kind of high level, but how
Yeah.
does it day to day benefit the economy? Like what does that mean?
Well, I mean, people need housing, right? Obviously, that's
Sure.
we'll talk about, multifamily, single family, because that's one of the bigger asset classes of real estate. It's not the only one, obviously, but people need housing. And so we want to the government does not want to provide housing. Okay. And they just don't. Now they'll help incentivize that by giving certain tax credits and things like that, but they don't want to do it. And so they want people to buy housing. Well, people can't afford housing. And so the majority of the working class rents. And I mean, and it keeps going up every year, by the way. So this is really a statistic you should follow because it's fascinating to see, especially the younger generation going to the working class. They're renters for the most part, and so they need stable places to live. And so, in order to create that kind of stabilization, allow people to not who do invest in real estate to pay less income tax, which will allow them to spend more money on the property, make it a better place to live, a better community, and ultimately have more money to maybe reinvest and buy more properties, et cetera, and help that. So that's just one example of for the multifamily, for the working class housing, to help incentivize that.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay. And so if we're talking about, cost segregation is over a 5 year period, what happens in year six?
So year six, once you've taken those 5 year deductions, and again, we're talking about 20 to 30% of the total amount of depreciation that we're accelerating, they're taking up front. The remaining 70, 80% is still going to be on that longer 27.5 year schedule. So we're
Got
still
it.
going to have that deduction. It's just going to be relatively less. And so again, the benefit is the time value of money that I can use that to reinvest during those years, and essentially uh, the compound interest that you're getting essentially by using money to reinvest, make more money with it, is
Mhm.
greater than the benefit of the deduction you'll have 5, 6 years from now.
Got it. Can you dive into the time value of money? Because I think that's an amazing topic.
Absolutely. I mean, simply put, it means that a dollar today is worth more than a dollar 5 years from now. Not just because of inflation, right? Because we're well aware of that. That's certainly true, but because of what you can do with that money in the meantime. And think about, I like to give the analogy of the lottery. If someone wins the lottery, they'll give you the option to either, take a lump sum right now or, take an equal amount over, 30 years or something like that, right? So
Hmm.
most people would want the big, huge lump sum right now, right? Well, maybe
Hmm.
for the wrong reasons, because most people that win the lottery end up squandering all that money, and I don't know, half of them commit suicide and stuff. But that's not the point of this. The point is what you can do. Someone who's smart, someone who's an investor knows that I can do more with that money, make more with that money if I have it now than by just taking an equal amount over a 30-year period.
Got it. Okay. So yeah, the time value of money states that a dollar today is worth more than a dollar in 5 years. So the benefit of this analogy is you want as much money as you can up front you want to save as much money as you can up front to be able to go and invest that over whatever time horizon you're talking about, in this case 5 years.
Yeah, you can make more money when you have more money. I mean, it's just a simple finance.
Right. Right. Okay. Okay. Man, so cool. That's I feel like every time I hear about cost segregation, I get very excited because it's like, man, I should probably do that. And actually, we have used Madison Specs in the past, so it's a little bit of a plug. I
Yeah,
very
there you
much
go. I
appreciate
mean,
your work.
it's something that I think, like we said at the beginning, like most people don't know about, right, until they hear about it. And
Right.
I'm sure you were kind of in a similar boat, right? You had been investing in real estate for a few years, and like, and we met. I don't know if you'd heard about Cossack before that point, but it's like, what in the world is this thing?
Right, right. Well, it was so funny because yeah, we met at that conference in North Carolina, and I was chatting with someone about cost segregation because I had always thought you could only do it for larger multifamily buildings, and someone was like, "Oh no, I did it on a short term rental I have," and my mind was, I think I messaged you immediately. It's like, Yonah,
Yep,
can we do cost seg on an Airbnb? And you're like, "Yep, do it all the time."
mind blown. Yeah, it's absolutely amazing.
Man, okay, cool. So, can you kind of go through a little bit? Um, what is your like? What does this cost? So, if someone wants to do a cost segregation, I'm assuming it's not free. So, what does your end look like?
And it's a really important question because, like you said, you thought it was only for like larger multifamily properties, and part of that misconception is the misconception of how much something like this costs. And there are like articles out there online. There's like this article from the Journal of Accountancy from like 2004, like floating around the internet. If you Google cost segregation, that will like come up. And it says like, oh, it's inhibitive because it costs like, 30, 40, $50,000 to get a cost segregation done. And so this can only be done in large commercial buildings. Well, that may have been the case, 20 years ago, but is no longer the case today. So it costs typically somewhere, currently we're charging somewhere between like $3,000 to $5,000 for smaller properties, maybe upwards of 6 or 7 for like larger commercial properties. So it's not a huge amount to spend. Again, it's not contingent on the tax savings. So we're not taking a percentage like, oh, we'll save you $1 million and we're going to take 10% of that. No, we're going to give a flat fee based on the type of property, the size of the property, the scope of work involved. And so it doesn't matter if you bought a property for, $100,000 or $100 million. The cost is going to be relatively the same. Obviously, the benefits are far greater, right? The more expensive the property, the great, because the tax benefits are proportionate to the purchase price. So the greater the purchase price, the greater the benefit.
Got it. Which is really cool from the consumer's end, right? Because they're paying a lump sum fee up front, regardless of how much tax savings they're going to get from the report.
Right. And so that's why I think where this comes, this conception of, or misconception rather, of how much is it going to cost, and therefore what size property does it make most sense on. And I said $100,000, but typically speaking, any property purchase for over $200,000, it already makes sense from a financial perspective. Not just makes sense, but actually is very beneficial.
Sure. And I'm sure, does it also depend on how long someone's planning to hold the property?
It certainly does. Yeah, there are a lot of factors. I think those are two important ones that we mentioned here. How long you hold a property is a huge factor because there is something called depreciation recapture tax when you sell a property. And so you want to make sure that that time value of money that we're talking about is going to be utilized property. And so if you're holding a property for a very short period of time, like a year or two, the benefit is going to be less because that time value of money is going to be less. You're going to have that benefit, but then are going to be taxed on the sale like a capital gain. And therefore, the benefits are just going to be less.
Gotcha. Gotcha. That makes total sense. Makes total sense. Um, I would like to ask a couple more personal questions, if that's okay.
Your curiosity got the better of you, huh? Yeah, let's do it.
Well, so
I just like saying the word.
yeah. So you mentioned that you were first and foremost a husband and a father, which I think is a beautiful way to say what you do first and foremost. And obviously, money is a big part of your life. It's what you do professionally. It's what you talk about on a regular basis. How do you think about teaching your children about money and giving them a good financial education at the same time, not letting them be spoiled or be driven exclusively by money, because that's probably something that you don't want, I'm assuming. So yeah, how do you think about teaching your kids about money?
It's a big challenge. I mean, it's a very big challenge not to spoil your kids, right? You really want to help them, but ultimately helping them is teaching them the right way to, long term how to view money. I think the most important lesson I can teach my kids about money is really twofold. Number one, and I'm not saying can teach, what I do teach, the most two important things is, number one is that ultimately none of it belongs to us, right? I believe everything belongs to God. Like, we're placed in this world for a purpose. Money is just, it's a tool to serve a purpose. And that being said, the second half is we're a steward for that. And so we're a steward to use our money wisely. And very, an important aspect of that is using it to give and to, give charity and to help others who are in need. And not just because it's like, okay, that's just something I have to do. It's part of that. No, that actually should be, should be kind of at the front of your mind all the time. So for me, like, any money that I make, the more money that I make, the more money I can give. And so it's not, I think a lot of people have this um, have this really unhealthy relationship with money, in that, especially in American society, we're taught that, we have to buy things, and, kind of your
Hmm.
stature in society is based a lot on what you have, and, how you look, and etc. And I'm a very frugal type of person. Like, I don't own anything like luxury whatsoever. I have very, very, very little needs. And teaching that to my kids, living by example of that, is I think the most powerful thing. And I heard this quote and it really, really struck me, and I use it often, which is, when your income increases or you make more money, don't increase your standard of living, rather increase your standard of giving. And so what that
Mm,
means to me is like, okay, I made, let's say, $100,000 this year, and I'm going to give, I'm a good person. I believe in tithing, for example. And so I'm going to give, 10% of that to charity. Well, okay, that's great. Now let's say the next year I make $1 million. Wow, that's a huge jump. Well, wait a second. I can, give 10%, $100,000, but how much of that million do I actually need? Meaning, I was perfectly fine, like, living off of $100,000. My standard of living is, status quo. I was able to get by, pay the bills, everything like that. So I have this excess of money I don't really need. Now, a lot of people would spend it on things, right? And get a bigger house or get a nicer car or all kinds of things. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. That's just not how I feel, how I view things. And it's not my perspective. I say, okay, I have this much more money. That means I can give away and help, a lot more people, because I have all this excess money that that I don't really need. And,
mm,
I'm, yes, okay, there's something about you putting some away. You don't have a emergency fund, and I'm all for that. And maybe investing, I'm all for that, right, et cetera. But in the end of the day, it's not about, okay, I made 100,000, I'm giving 10% of that, and I make a million, give 10% of that. No, well, increase that. Okay, I don't really need all that extra. Okay, maybe a 20% at this point of my money, or
yeah.
whatever it is too. But that's kind of how I view it personally, and those are the standards. Those are the lessons that I teach my children. Hopefully, it's coming through.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. If you wouldn't mind sharing, how do those lessons show up, day to day? Like, if do they do chores and get an allowance, and so you encourage them, okay, the first, whatever percentage of dollars you get, we're going to donate to charity. What does that look like?
Well, I give it, yeah, we definitely do that, but I allow them to, kind of make their own choices, and allow them to, not force it upon them, so to speak, of saying, okay, you made this money, now we're going to take it away. That's more like taxes, and I'm not against teaching them that lesson either. Right? Like a story, like the kid, take like a huge bite out of their ice cream cone, like, hey, that, now you understand how tax works. um no, the the point is, to encourage them, to teach them about it, and to live by example and show them. So, like, I'll go to, if, they know that people come to me and, like, ask me for donations, and organizations come, and a lot of organizations that I support, I'll get like a gift in the mail, or, a plaque or something like that. Someone will sound like, what's that? Like, oh, well, I donated, X amount to this cause or whatever. And so they'll see it, and it kind of gets ingrained. So I'm not, like, forcing them and saying, oh yeah, you're making your allowance, you have to now give X amount. But we're showing them what that means and encouraging them to do so. And so it really does come naturally at that point. They want to, on their own, uh, to give. And so it's really just a matter of, who and where and how, rather than, the actual what, or the mechanics of it.
Yeah, yeah, that's a beautiful lesson. My wife and I don't have kids, but it's something that I'm always really interested to ask parents, because I think it's a very hard conversation, and I'm always just so curious, like, Yeah, what does that look like? How do you implement that on a day-to-day basis?
It's on a day-to-day basis is really just like baby steps, you know what I mean? Like little bits over time, and encouraging and talking about money. That's a really important thing as well. Like I did not grow up like talking about money in our house. Like it was kind of like almost a taboo topic,
Hmm.
And unfortunately, I think a lot of people, grow up like that and not having the financial education and really understanding it. I did have an allowance growing up for doing certain chores and things like that, but I just whenever I got that, I just used it and spent it to buy, toys
Gum.
or treats or gum, exactly, candy, whatever it was. But I wasn't taught, how to save and how to invest or anything like that. So I think those are important things. And nowadays there's actually a lot of educational material. There's books out there. I have friends and people that I know, my network as well, that have written children's books about finances and money and things like that. So there are a lot of things out there available.
Do you remember the names offhand?
Yeah, so we got Danny Randazzo, who actually was one of the co-hosts of that
Oh
conference we
yeah.
met at.
Okay.
He's written two books, children's books. That is. There's also a guy, Gino Barbaro, who also hosts another conference called the Jake and Gino, their group, and he and his wife actually have published, I think, two or three children's books on the topic of money. And there are several more out there. I'm sure you can kind of Google, but those are two that come on the top of my head. I don't remember the exact names of them, but those are the authors. You can look on Amazon. I'm sure they're listed there.
Sweet. Okay. Thank you. All right. The next question I want to ask you about is, what is your, obviously you're a very high achieving person, and it seems like you have a very balanced approach to life. Like just talking to you, it just seems like you have a lot of things going on, but you don't seem stressed. You don't seem overwhelmed. It's very balanced. So can you walk us through like what is your typical Tuesday look like? What is your daily routine? What is like if you're not traveling, that is, and then one day when you are traveling. So a non-travel day and a travel day. What does your day look like?
Well, there's certain things in my life, and I'm a very religious, Jewish, Orthodox, Hasidic, whatever you want to call it. So I have a lot of I would say like rules and things that I keep, but certain daily kind of practical spiritual activities or things that I do, including praying and meditating and studying. So these are daily things that every single day, no matter what, rain or shine, anywhere I go, every day, same thing. So several hours of the day are dedicated and devoted to that without any interruption, meaning no phone, no anything during that time. So I think that's one thing, and that's like the first thing when you wake up in the morning, right? The first thing is dedicated to those hours. And so even before I open a phone, open anything, it's focus on God, focus on spirituality, focus on what's the purpose of life, what's the purpose of this world, and that really gives a lot of grounding and stability to the rest of the day. Your focus is on something greater, and so therefore you carry that with you into everything that you do throughout the day. It's like I'm, going to the office and spending, several hours, in the office doing podcasts and doing emails and phone calls and whatever needs to be done. But all the time, my mindset and my outlook on life is that kind of grounded, calmness that you're talking about of I have a purpose here. This is, I'm doing this for a purpose. I'm doing this, X, Y, Z. And so I think that is kind of the background. And so that's what I'm not giving you necessarily like hour to hour daily practice, what it is, but I think that's an important part of it.
Got it. So, great follow up. What time do you wake up? What's your, does that change?
It does sometimes. There are different times. I'm a person who's actually wakes up very, very early in the morning, or goes to sleep very, very late. So it's like one or the other, right? Meaning either like I can stay up like all night sometimes and just be focused on that, and or get up early in the morning before the sunrise and things like that. So it's either one or the other,
Got it. Okay. All right.
which makes for a
Um,
kind of crazy schedule. But I live in Israel, and so I'm actually on a different time zone than most. Yet my business and my working hours are during American U.S. Eastern time, kind of working hours. So it it does make for a kind of crazy schedule, but at the same time, it's kind of how I've had to work it out in order to make things work.
Right. And that's a 7-hour time difference, right?
Correct.
Okay. Oh, jeez. So you mentioned purpose a couple times. Big question. What is your purpose?
I think everyone is placed in the world for a specific purpose, and we may not necessarily know what that is. I think it may be a little bit, I don't know, arrogant, in my opinion, to assume that you know what your purpose is, right? Because you know we didn't create ourselves. We don't have that control, and so therefore, it's really a life's work of just trying to become a better person and trying to do more for others, and slowly realizing, okay, maybe that's my purpose, And so I think it's an ongoing process of just doing and giving, and you'll learn along the way what that purpose is. So ultimately, if I had to say, what my purpose is, I believe that I was put in this world to help other people, right, and to give them my time, to give them my resources, and so I've just seen that over the years, like, okay, that's what I'm good at. These are things, and these are things that keep coming up in my life over and over and over again, and challenges. Okay, so maybe this is maybe my purpose.
Hmm. How do you know when you're on the right track? Like if you're doing something, because obviously you if your life's goal is to find your purpose, fair enough. But every day you're doing things, and every day you have
Hmm.
things that you're doing. So presumably those things you're putting a lot of value on. So how
Right.
do you know when you're doing something that is aligned?
Yeah, it's really hard to do that unless you have some objectivity, unless you have some mentors, you have people outside of you who can put you on the right path and kind of give you that guidance, not necessarily tell you
Hmm.
what to do, but maybe give you the guidance of, here you have, two choices, like maybe this one's over the other, give you the different pros and cons, and allow you kind of come to those decisions on your own. But again, the objectivity of kind of someone who knows you and knows kind of what your purpose is or knows what you're good at and puts you in that right path to make sure to keep staying on that path and correct you when you're wrong. Criticism is a very powerful tool to kind of get you back in the right place.
For sure, for sure. Do you think, because something I always struggle with when I think about who to look up to and who to be a mentor, like I feel like I'm very uh, picky, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm like, man, I don't want to look up to someone who's crushing it in real estate, let's say, but who's a horrible person and doesn't
Oh
have a
yeah,
balanced family life and
for
doesn't
sure.
take care of their health. So when you're looking at a potential mentor, when you try to look up to people, does it matter to you the holistic view, or is it more important? Okay, I want someone who's, um, if I want a nutritionist, let's say, I don't
Hmm.
so much care if they're also into spirituality. I want someone who's really good at nutrition. Or does the
Right.
holistic matter to you? What do you think?
To me personally, the holistic does matter. So, meaning I want to be able to relate to someone personally on multiple levels, and so I can't, in good faith, right, trust someone who I don't, who I think maybe doesn't live their life in a morally correct way. So, I mean,
Sure.
obviously, that's going to be different for everyone. But example that you were saying, like someone who's very crushing real estate but has a horrible family life, or some like that's not someone that I'm going to look up to. I had someone who I met recently at a conference, recently, like a year or two ago, and he was telling me he had recently divorced, and we were carrying conversation, and he said, he was very successful in real estate and was literally flying every single week from New York to Texas, and basically never home for like 10, 15 years or something like that, like and that can ruin a marriage. That simply just being away, like not being there, and when you do come home, you're exhausted from the whole time. So it's saying that is someone that, yes, he may have been crushing in real estate, but because of that, he ruined his marriage. That's not something that I can really look up to. And
Right.
so, yes, they may be successful in one aspect, but that's not necessarily someone that I want to like spend my time with learning from. How, albeit there's definitely something to learn from them, and I'm a big believer in there's something to learn from everyone, and so you really can pick different things up, not necessarily to make them your mentor per se, but certainly to learn things from.
That's a beautiful answer. I really like that framing.
Yeah, and oftentimes, like I said, you can learn from everyone. Oftentimes, you can learn from some people what not to do.
Right. Right. And I think that's tough to do right? Because if you see someone on the internet, I think it's so hard to, they're showing a very specific side, right?
Oh
And so
yeah,
you almost need people in the real world, so to speak, to vet for that person. Like, hey, I know them; they're a good person. They do this, this, and this.
100%. Yeah, I'm not for having mentors, people that I've never met before.
Mm,
Again, you can learn from everyone different things, but don't think that like everything there is to know about that person just because
sure,
you see them on social media or something.
sure. What's an aspect that you're trying to grow in right now? Like, what's something that you're seeking mentorship in your current life?
Currently, just trying to figure out how to give more. To be honest,
Mm,
how to kind of hone that. So I spend time with people who are, and I think part of the mentorship is apprenticing, also just spending time with people who are doing things like that. And so part of what I do is just spend time with other people who are big givers, big um, philanthropists and things like that. So that's something that I'm really focused on.
that's so cool. That's so cool.
Yeah.
And I know you're also a big reader, and you ask a question in your podcast of a book that you've read recently. I want to ask you what you're reading right now, and what recommendations you have for people of books to read.
So right now I'm actually reading a really interesting book. It's a combination. So there's a book called The Power of Now. Have you heard of that one before?
Uh-uh.
So the Power of Now is I'm just gonna look it up right now. The Power of Now is a German philosopher by the guy's name of Eckhart Tolle, and he's written a couple of books, and one of them is I'm gonna Google right now because a friend of mine took two of his books and actually combined it into one, and so he wrote one book called The Power of Now. The other book is called um, A New Earth, Awakening Your Life's Purpose. Okay. And so
Wow.
yeah, really, really powerful, very spiritual type books. Like, they call it like spiritual enlightenment stuff. And there's some stuff in there that I'm not too fond of, too keen of, but the concept and like exercises that really he does through it is just incredible. Like living like to your life's fullest, and it's all about focusing on the now, the present, etc. So a friend of mine took these two books and actually combined them into like a workbook and edited them slightly, but he didn't publish it to be for the masses. But that's a book that I'm reading right now. So Power of Now. But anyways, The Power of Now, a very, very powerful book. If you haven't checked it out, definitely
Okay.
highly recommend that.
And do you read? Do you try to read every day, or do you listen to books? Do you read physical books? And
I read every day. I listen to audiobooks also very often. I also do a lot of studying. So I spend hours every day focused on like Jewish texts. We do something
mm,
called the Daf Yomi, which is learning. There's the ultimate work of the Jewish text is called the Talmud, right? The Babylon Talmud. It's a very, very huge work of 2,800 folios. That's double pages. Over 5,000 pages of basically everything Jewish law and everything like that. And so there's a worldwide kind of movement that started over 100 years ago of people, business people, like learning just one page every day. And so you do one
mm,
thing every day, and over a 7-year period, you complete the entire series. And it's something that I've been doing for years, and highly recommend that for anyone out there. But yeah, it's pretty powerful. So I do that and other things as well. So definitely reading a lot every day.
gotcha. And do you find that you can retain more information in the mornings? You said you study mostly in the mornings. Do you also read
Mhm.
non religious texts in the mornings, or is that kind of spread whenever you have time throughout the day?
Um, Yeah, not much in the morning of non-religious texts, but I definitely retain more in the morning for sure.
Okay. Okay. Well, Yonah, I so appreciate you being on here and answering our questions and explaining cost segregation, and I think a lot of other, not to say more important, but difference of importance things.
Hmm.
I really appreciate you and your time and the way that you think about things, and it's really beautiful to see and get to listen to. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely.